around the nation, TYT Nation. Jeff Waldorf here with you. Post-debate, we got 19 days until the Iowa caucus. 19 days until the first votes start to get cast in the Democratic primary. So important stuff. We're getting into crunch time. So now, since there was a debate last night, I'm going to talk just a little bit about it. We're going to talk about how CNN is garbage, it's trash. Then we're going to talk about the snub heard around the world. So that's an interesting segment. I have some thoughts about that. Then we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about some documents that were released by Lev Parnas, that's Giuliani's former associate, who has now flipped over and is releasing documents about Marie Yovanovitch, that is the ex-Ukraine ambassador. So, man, that is a disturbing story because there are messages, and I don't want to give too much away, but it is incredibly disturbing. Then we're going to switch gears to something a little strange, kind of lighten the mood. Trial by combat in Kansas. Fascinating. And then, finally, for your final story of the day, we're going to talk about climate disaster. So, fun times. We got a lot of great news on today's show, don't we? So, now before we do that, please like and share the stream. Very important. Helps get the word out to everybody. So please do that, like and share. And also leave comments, super chats, even questions, and I'll take them after we get back from the first break. So without further ado, let's just dive into it. And I will explain why CNN is absolute garbage. That's the worst Photoshop I've ever done. All right. CNN is officially trash. So last night we had the last Democratic debate before the Iowa caucuses, and it was hosted by CNN, and it was bad. Really, really bad. So now this debate followed a very lazy CNN hit piece released the same day, alleging that Bernie Sanders told Elizabeth Warren at a private meeting that a woman couldn't win the presidency, which is ironic because just a couple of years earlier, Bernie Sanders was pushing Elizabeth Warren to run against Hillary Clinton in the primary. Since she did not decide to do that, he decided to jump into the race. Now, again, a bit of an odd statement, right? Because you have 40 years of statements showing the complete opposite. Nonetheless, the network took aim at Bernie Sanders. The Intercept had a headline that the most vociferous opponent in the debate was actually CNN and not any of the other fellow debaters. And of course, Biden, who was still considered by many to be the front runner, basically left essentially untouched. He got tweaked a little bit on some of the, Iraq questions, but basically they left him alone. Buttigieg, of course, got plenty of time to speak, as did Klobuchar. And what happened basically is that CNN couldn't help but stoke the division between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, a division that they're reporting, along with reporting from Politico, had widened in the last few days. So now let me get to first some of the framing of the questions, right? So now a lot of the questions asked Bernie Sanders, and this is a normal thing, so it's something that I always complain about after the debates, but the questions are very framed from a right-wing perspective, right? So again, the first questions they talked about is Iran and Iraq, and again, Sanders challenged Biden on the Iraq war. Later on, they went into a healthcare segment. And one of the first questions, and this is something that Bernie Sanders gets every single time, how are you going to pay for that? Well, how are you going to pay for Medicare for all? Biden said, repeated the lie that it would cost an additional $30 trillion. That's not true. That's 100% false. It'd actually be $2 trillion cheaper than our current system, according to studies even from the conservative Mercatus Institute. So during the segment on war, they didn't ask how you're going to pay for it. And they had questions basically, aside from a direct invasion of the U.S. or attack on the U.S., would you go to war without Congress's approval? That's what they asked everybody. And of course, Bernie Sanders said absolutely not. And he was against war. He voted against the Iraq war. And that's something that, of course, he decided to hit Joe Biden on, very much so. So here's the thing. Bernie Sanders was focused on trying to attack Joe Biden, whereas everyone else, including the network, was based on attacking Bernie Sanders because of his recent rise in the polls. Look, I don't have any problem with, challenging a candidate. Like, for example, I didn't have a problem with challenging Pete Buttigieg or Elizabeth Warren when she got a big bump in the polls. Problem is the questions that they ask and the framing that they use to ask those questions. And that's where you run into some problems, right? So now, again, they don't ask how you're going to pay for war, right? As I keep pointing out. And what's funny is because we shower money on the Pentagon and nobody asks how we're going to pay for that. But yet when we ask to, expand healthcare to everybody, well, we'd rather spend money to take lives instead of spend money to help protect lives. And that's how little humanity is worth in the eyes of some people, right? Now, in another segment, Sanders was interrupted by CNN hosts when he tried to tie trade into climate change, right? So both of those things, they are linked, and yet CNN hosts, not just Wolf Blitzer, said, no, we're going to have another climate change segment later, so don't you dare talk about climate change whatsoever, even in your answer about trade. Well, that seems pretty ridiculous, right? Later on, Wolf Blitzer also asked whether the government should do anything to lower drug prices when nobody trusts the government. Again, right-wing framing. Philip later asked Sanders how he would keep his plans from bankrupting the country. So, look, nobody gets those kinds of questions or that kind of framing. I mean, look, let's be fair. Warren did back when she was had more progressive plans, right? Then she released her plan, for example, on Medicare for All, her transition plan, which let's just say was panned by progressives. And that was around the same time that her poll numbers started to flounder. And it was because she backed away from single payer. So now what's worse than some of the questions is the chyrons they put up, the lower thirds, when they were asking those questions. And I want to show you a couple of examples. So let's take a look. So Warren supports a new trade deal with Mexico and Canada. Why is Sanders' opposition to it wrong? There's your framing, right? Sanders' proposals would double federal spending over a decade. How will he avoid bankrupting the country? Again, not true, but there's the framing. And then does Sanders owe voters an explanation of how much his healthcare plan will cost them and the country? I mean, these you can see it right there. You can see right there. Dishonest questions, right? But they're coming at it from a framing of that's pie in the sky, that's impossible, right? A definite right-wing framing. And it bothers me, but look, not only did every question to Sanders get framed in such a way, but the CNN moderator had completely ignored Bernie Sanders' answer to a question when he was asking, when he and Elizabeth Warren were asked about this. Take a look.
You're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
Senator Warren, what did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman could not win the election?
I disagreed.
Disagreed. But wait, you just basically, he said, I didn't say that. And the moderator basically ignored him and said, well, how'd you feel when he said that? But he didn't say that. He didn't say that. Ridiculous, right? Super, super disappointing when it comes to these moderators from CNN. They're not even pretending to be neutral anymore. They're not even pretending to be objective. They took their own hit piece released earlier that day as fact, and they immediately took Warren's side instead of asking Warren, did that really happen? What did you, and if it did, what did you think about it? Instead, they presented this as fact. Nobody knows what happened in that room. Nobody knows what was said. All we know is the track record for Bernie Sanders when it comes to women's issues, when it comes to backing women, when it comes to backing women candidates, as he had done. Again, remember, he backed Elizabeth Warren back in 2015. There was a draft Warren movement that Bernie Sanders had asked her, please run in this election. She said, no, I'm not going to. Bernie Sanders stepped in instead. I remember that. I lived through it. So it's garbage, absolute garbage. And it's right there. So now, following this, CNN is garbage, CNN is trash, started trending on Twitter. Now, let me give you some tweets here. Let's see. CNN is absolute trash, framing every question as Bernie is a horrible person, says one Twitter user. Literally the worst debate ever. Please end this. Another Twitter user, going by the name of Walker, said CNN shouldn't be allowed to host debates anymore. So now what's interesting about that, right, is that a lot of people were saying about Fox News debates. Well, Fox News we shouldn't do debates on Fox News. We shouldn't allow them because they're going to be biased, right? Fox News, going back to the debate that Fox News had done, they actually were more fair to all the candidates than CNN was to Bernie Sanders. They were more impartial. When Fox News does a better job than your network at being impartial, you know there's something wrong. Instead of banning Fox News from hosting debates, they should ban CNN because this is obvious bias. Obvious. All right, more. Michael Cook says, I've been a Democrat and have watched CNN my whole life. Well, no longer after last night's horrendous debate trashing Bernie Sanders. On and on. My Dakini says, Bernie went to Elizabeth Warren in 2015 and said, I think you can win. I think you should run. And it's quoting something said earlier by Joe Scarborough. Now, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, now these guys Joe's a Republican or a former Republican, now an independent. And even Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski are calling this out, saying, what is that? That is bizarre. Why would you do that? When they're calling out CNN for being biased, that's a real problem. They messed up. Finally, let's see. The rest of that tweet said, everyone knows Sanders has been a feminist for decades. To claim otherwise is gaslighting. Americans no longer tolerate narcissistic gaslighting. And finally, A.C. Monroe said it was awful. They are clearly biased against Bernie Sanders. They aren't impartial at all. It's not journalism. As FAIR.org, that's the Foundation for Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, they did a segment on that. They did a piece on that, calling out CNN for using lazy, shoddy journalistic practices. Again, they took 4 anonymous sources, 2 of which talked to Warren afterwards, and the other 2 had heard about the meeting, right? So, of course, the only source in that room would have been Elizabeth Warren, since it was a private meeting. They took that, used that as fact against Bernie Sanders. Look, that's what they consider to be reporting these days. No, absolute garbage. Total garbage. Now, AC Monroe, to finish up that tweet, says, it's sensationalism and ratings they are after at the expense of progressive candidates. It was a nightmare to watch. Shame on CNN. They are helping Trump. And I think that's something that we can take away. This not only helps Donald Trump, but also helps Joe Biden. And look, this is a great way. This is something that these corporate channels, CNN, MSNBC, the pundits, the consultants who are in the centrist establishment want. They want a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren feud. They want those two to fight so that Joe Biden gets left alone. And guess what? Elizabeth Warren never brought up the bankruptcy bill from Joe Biden. That's supposed to be Elizabeth Warren's wheelhouse. That is supposed to be something that she cares deeply about. In 7 debates, why has she not brought that up? I mean, that's a good question. It's a fair question. And how, and you could see, of course, with Joe Biden being essentially left alone, Klobuchar, Buttigieg, they don't mention anything about South Bend when it came to Buttigieg and how African Americans, you want to talk about unity, right? African Americans do not like Pete Buttigieg whatsoever. African Americans, the two top candidates that they go for is Joe Biden, followed closely by Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth Warren has a hard time with African Americans, although she is trying to reach out. And so they don't talk about any of that. But no, they create feuds like CNN, like Politico, like the Washington Post to try to divide the progressives and to try to basically stir up ratings and gin up a fight between those two so that Biden can slide through. It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. All right. Last night's contentious CNN debate ended with the snub heard around the world. Take a look.
And good evening. I'm Anderson Cooper live from the Democratic debate in Des Moines, Iowa. This was it, the last time Americans will hear the Democratic candidates all on a stage together, hearing them debate before the first votes are cast 20 days from now. Caucuses in 20 days. 6 candidates on stage, laser focus on policy, Iran.
All right, so look, here we have what seemed to be a heated discussion between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. What was said, we don't know, right? But look, the fact is that she refused to shake his hand following the debate, and that, to me, seems to not be a very good sign, especially considering that Warren's campaign previous to the debate actually wanted to de-escalate its situation with Bernie Sanders. Now, as according to BuzzFeed, one of Warren's campaign officials advised supporters in a large pro-Warren group chat on Twitter that their next step would be to dial back the confrontation happening with Bernie Sanders. Let's see. It states, the message does, where we go from here, our goal is de-escalation and focusing on our shared goals. The staffer wrote to the group, according to screenshots of the chat. So, look, that's a good goal. I would have liked a de-escalation, but it appears that did not happen. So during the debate, of course, we saw CNN bringing up their own poorly sourced hit piece that insinuated that Bernie Sanders was some sort of sexist who didn't believe that women could actually win an election, right? Despite Bernie Sanders urging Warren to run back in 2015 and telling Hillary Clinton, of course, that she could beat Trump and become president. A lot of people forget how hard Bernie Sanders, and some people want to forget how hard Bernie Sanders actually fought for Hillary Clinton to get elected, how much he actually tried to get a lot of his supporters who actually did follow his advice to support and vote for Hillary Clinton. In fact, Hillary Clinton had twice as much support from Sanders supporters as Barack Obama had from Hillary Clinton supporters back in 2008. So, all right, now, going back, right, even so far back as to 1987, where Bernie Sanders was telling young girls in a classroom that they too could become president. In fact, I've got that video. Take a look.
One other woman governor, they're off the mayor of San Francisco. is a woman, and there are many women mayors, but not enough. And one of the very important things, and I hope that all the girls in this class understand, that you, just as much as the boys, have a right to become president. There's not been a woman president, although there was a woman who was giving thought to running for president this time, from Colorado, a woman named Representative Schroeder, gave some thought. So I hope that the girls will think that they have the right to be involved in politics quite as much as the boys do. It's beginning to change, but it's not changing fast enough.
It's beginning to change, but it's not changing fast enough. Women could absolutely be president of the United States. I mean, it's pretty clear. You saw it with your own eyes. All the way back in 1987. 1988, Bernie Sanders was on board of Jesse Jackson's campaign. He said that, yes, a woman, of course, could be president of the United States. So it's complete fabrication, a complete lie from, and I hate using this term, fake news CNN. So now we can tell that they, of course, had it out for Bernie Sanders. They also framed their questions in very ridiculous ways, right-wing framing. But the thing that they brought up that inflamed Sanders supporters the most is when they asked this.
You're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
Senator Warren, what did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman could not win the election?
I disagreed.
Again, that's not at all true. She said that basically that Bernie Sanders was lying when he denied saying that. He didn't say it. As far as we know, that a woman couldn't win. So either Elizabeth Warren is lying or Bernie Sanders is lying. Or at the very least, Elizabeth Warren misinterpreted what Bernie Sanders was trying to say. I, of course, was not in the room. There's nobody in the room except for the two of them. But Sanders, look, from his explanation, he basically was doing what a good friend would do, warning his friend who plans to run for president that Trump will attack her in the most vicious ways. Sexist attacks. He was, again, doing what any good friend would do. Hey, Trump's going to say this about you, and they're going to come after you with this. And so you got to be ready, right? And so, look, to prepare your friend for that onslaught of horribleness is what, again, any good friend would do, right? But look, and here's the other thing about that. And it should be obvious, right? But Donald Trump does not play nice, okay? Like Bernie plays nice. I know that makes people's heads explode. What are you talking about? Bernie Sanders is vicious. Oh my God. And his supporters are terrible. No, you haven't seen Vicious, right? No, Vicious is Donald Trump, who does not care what he says. He will go after you on anything. And so Trump will not play nice to Elizabeth Warren. And I don't know if she's ready for that. Maybe she is, maybe she isn't. Who knows, right? So now the other thing is, I'm wondering, she sat on this for 2 years. Assuming that she's right, assuming we believe her, why bring it up now? Well, I mean, look, there's a good chance the script, the whole script kerfuffle, right? And that's an interesting word, kerfuffle. That's what precipitated this. Now, let me explain that whole situation. So now, there's a script that was released on Friday. This is Bernie Sanders' campaign script that people who were, canvassing for Bernie would say to Elizabeth Warren supporters, right? Now, in it, the script said that Warren supporters were more affluent and more highly educated than Bernie Sanders supporters. Also, less diverse, right? So that comes out, and Bernie Sanders says, well, I didn't approve that personally. The campaign later on says, well, the campaign did. It was on official campaign letterhead. But a day later, it comes out on Friday. They killed it on Saturday, saying that it was sloppy writing. Now, Politico reports that, I believe, on Saturday or Sunday. And then on Monday, Elizabeth Warren says, well, I can't believe Bernie Sanders is trashing me. Well, okay, let me read you that script, right? It says, and you can see for yourself whether or not this is trashing Elizabeth Warren, right? Quote, I like Elizabeth Warren. That's a weird way to start out trashing. In fact, she's my second choice, but here's my concern about her. And it's trying to make a distinction between those two candidates. People who support her are highly educated, more affluent people who are going to show up and vote Democratic no matter what. So she's bringing no new bases into the Democratic Party. We need to turn out disaffected working class voters if we are going to beat Trump. Now, look, that's a fairly good message. And look, the polling backs that up. Warren does have a lot of wealthy, college-educated liberals supporting her. Some who are even, consider themselves very liberal. Okay. Now, she does struggle a bit with African Americans, though not nearly as much, of course, as Mayor Pete Buttigieg. And more working class voters, more working class people, as well as younger people, support Bernie Sanders. Not to mention people in more active military people support Bernie Sanders as well. So there's not as much of an overlap as the media previously reported between Sanders and Warren, their bases, which is why you've seen Warren tack a bit to the center, because it turns out those wealthy college-educated liberals are slightly more moderate. All right. Now, pointing that out, it's not a smear, it's factual observation. But here's the thing. That's actually kind of embarrassing to Elizabeth Warren's campaign, because that would be admitting that she had the same problem as Hillary Clinton, not attracting working class people, working class voters of all different demographics. Now, here's who does best with African Americans. Right now, Joe Biden. Joe Biden is leading with African American voters, especially older ones. Now, Bernie Sanders, of course, has the second most amount of African American support, generally younger, right? We saw what happened with Hillary Clinton. And this is the problem that could affect Elizabeth Warren if she becomes the nominee. Hillary Clinton could not get the Obama coalition together. There was not as much enthusiasm for her as there was Obama. And so, look, that is a problem for any campaign, especially when you're going against somebody who will probably try to run another populist campaign, Donald Trump. So Warren, of course, is not happy about this. And so I believe, and this is my speculation, that she pulls this accusation out of a conversation that Bernie Sanders and her had 2 years ago and used it to weaponize the identity against Bernie Sanders. That's what I believe. And this has, by the way, DC consultant class written all over it. I do not think that this is Elizabeth Warren's idea. These are Obama Clinton staffers telling her, do it, Liz, just do it. He smeared you as the elitist. Get him. Here's how to get him with sexism. I mean, again, total speculation, right? But the worst thing is, and the thing that we can't speculate on because we know what happened, is that she went with it. She actually did it. She pulled the trigger on that. And still, Bernie Sanders, he reached out and was rebuffed. And so that's what led Bernie Sanders to storm off stage. You don't necessarily have to hear the exchange between them to know that it was not friendly. And so, look, I looked at it and you could see kind of the pain in his face, right? And I know it's kind of weird and hokey to go in that direction, but like, no, I think it feels like a betrayal. Ouch. And so look, Bernie Sanders has never said anything negative against Elizabeth Warren. And yet here we are, right? And a lot of it, I think, is due to the media, where you had Politico and CNN basically doing everything they can to divide Sanders and Warren voters. And so, and look, what makes me the most upset about this is why on that stage, she did not say, hold on, I don't think Bernie Sanders is sexist at all. Because that's the intimation, right? That's what, was alleged by the whole statement of, well, Bernie doesn't think a woman could win the presidency. Of course, that would mean that he is a sexist if he doesn't believe that. She didn't stand up and say, I don't believe Bernie Sanders is sexist at all. He didn't say this, or maybe he did say this in the context of Donald Trump and his attacks, I disagree with that. But she didn't. She didn't do that. And so, look, this is how the media successfully divided them. And this is what they've been looking for all the time. And they're doing it in order to give Joe Biden a pass. And again, look what happened in that debate. If you watch the whole thing, you could tell that Joe Biden was barely even touched by the moderators. Not at all. He was tweaked on the Iraq vote, but CNN itself, they were gunning for Bernie Sanders. And we know that. We have eyes, we can see it. I've never seen anything so incredibly biased and stacked in my life. And if you're wondering where we go from here, well, let's just say, and I know Twitter isn't real life, but man, you go there today, hashtag never Warren, hashtag never Bernie, both trending in the top spots. Not good. Not good. All right. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a break. We'll come back. We'll switch gears on this. And we're going to talk about some Parnas documents that just dropped, as well as our trial by combat story and more. So stay right here around the nation. Be right back.
Mike Pounds.
Welcome back to the show. Around the Nation right here, TOT Nation. Jeff Waldorf here. All right, so first, super chat here from Sarge Tech. Says, devastating anti-Trump ad by Republicans in Colorado against Cory Gardner. Called him weak, frightened, and impotent, saying he would be replaced. So yeah, I saw that ad. That's vicious. I love it. Nothing like Republican on Republican crime. Okay, so now let's get back to some patrons here. Thanks, some patrons. I want to thank Rebel Ellerby. Love that. And Stacey O'Neill. So thank you. Patreon.com/TYT Nation. That's you can support independent progressive media. Sign up there. And then for channel members, I want to thank Guga and Frode Birkland. So thank you. You can become a channel member by hitting the join button below. So now, important news. Before I get to a couple of comments, there may be a way to get, without being a member, a podcast version of the show. So now I've been looking for a home for our podcast, and I may have found one. So a little bit of a teaser, tease. But if everything goes well, we may have a home for our podcast, which, well, yes, unless you're a member, unless you're a patron and already get the podcast, which is ad-free, on our Patreon page, you can also listen to us on our new home, and I will announce when what that is later on. All right. So I want to do a couple of, like I said, member comments here from Peter S., who's a member. Last night shows those who control CNN are frightened by Bernie. Look, the establishment has made an entire U-turn on Bernie Sanders. First, there was a Bernie blackout where they ignored him for months and months and months, dismissed him. Now, all the articles coming out are suddenly like, oh crap, Bernie Sanders can win. And then this happens. So it shouldn't really be surprising. And then Zach Sherman says this is how CNN is taking down the progressives that are winning. They can't allow Bernie to win. And I think that's very true. There's a lot of money on the line. Okay. So that said, let's dive into the remaining segments of the show. Let's get into Lev Parnas. Okay. We have some pretty disturbing news coming out of the impeachment trial. So Lev Parnas released some documents. Now, Lev Parnas is the Giuliani associate who's waiting trial on campaign finance charges. He's one of the guys that tried to leave the United States and got caught with his companion, Igor Fruman. Now, Lev Parnas, of course, is cooperating with law enforcement officials. And these documents show that along with trying to dig up dirt on Biden and Burisma in Ukraine, they did something else very shady and possibly dangerous involving former Ukrainian ambassador Marie Yovanovitch. And so, look, the records turned over by Parnas' attorney show that the former ambassador was being closely monitored by a Republican congressional candidate. Her physical movements were tracked in real time along with her computer and phone usage. What the hell? What the hell? Look, do you realize that could put her... that put her in serious physical danger. But that's what we find out. And of course, she had testified before that she believed that she was threatened. And she had been threatened. So now, at the same time, she, of course, had been pressured by the Trump administration. And so whether she was going to be fired by Trump by not playing ball or whatever was going to happen to her in Ukraine, there was a lot of pressure on her. And she felt, of course, very threatened. So now the documents include WhatsApp exchanges between Parnas and a man named Robert Hyde. Now, Robert Hyde was a GOP candidate for Congress in Connecticut, and in the text, in the messages, they appeared to be discussing Yovanovitch. Now, the exchanges in March of 2019 do not name the ambassador, but include links to stories about her and are from the period of time when Giuliani and his associates were trying to get her fired. Because, again, she wouldn't play ball with an investigation into Burisma. Now, the messages suggest that they'd learned the president had already decided to remove her, but may have changed his mind. Hyde's messages indicate Yovanovitch's physical movements were being tracked in real time, along with her computer and phone. Quote, in one exchange, Parnas is told, she is under heavy protection outside Kiev. They are moving her tomorrow. That's already, that's bad enough, right? Bad enough that she has to be under heavy protection, possibly because she fears for her life from reprisal from some of the shadier elements inside of Ukraine. Now, Hyde, whose campaign website said he's a former Marine and Iraq War veteran, sends an update saying that, quote, she will not be moved, and special security unit upgraded force on the compound. He tells Parnas on March 27th that we, quote, have a person on the inside. So inside of her protection, again, super creepy. And they even talked about, what we're going to do to get more people on the inside, or what kind of some sort of action that they were going to take against her. And again, this is incredibly disturbing. For me, it sounds like they might have meant to do her physical harm, or at the very least had threatened her into resigning herself. I mean, why would you need to be tracking her movements in real time? Why would you need to tap her phone? And I realize I might be jumping to extremes here, but this is what it sounds like. I think these are dangerous people. Dangerous. Now, she had also appeared to be the discussion between Giuliani, subject of discussion between Giuliani and Parnas a month later, with Giuliani writing, he fired her again. I pray it happens this time. I'll call you tomorrow, my brother, Parnas responded. So it's interesting to note that in his phone call with Zelensky, Trump had also said about Yovanovitch that she was, quote, bad news and was going to go through some things. What things is he talking about? Look, Donald Trump has long been suspected of having ties to the mob. I'm not saying it's true, but that sounds like mob talk. Oh, she's going to go through some things. Really, what things? What kind of things? What's more, in testimony before the House last year, Yovanovitch said that she had heard warnings from Ukrainian officials that Giuliani and Ukraine's then Prosecutor General, Yuri Lutsenko, had, quote, plans, and that they were going to, do things, including to me. What things? What things are they planning to do? Again, this is incredibly disturbing. Were they trying to kill her? Again, super extreme, right? Or threaten her? Why else would you want to know her movements in real time if you didn't plan on doing some sort of harm to her? I mean, that is super, super disturbing. Now, it gets even worse when you take Mr. Hyde into consideration. According to NBC, Hyde was an outspoken supporter of the president. However, he was reportedly removed from the Trump National Doral, Miami, by police in May. He was removed from Trump's Bedbug Hotel. Well, why? What happened? He claimed that a hitman was out to get him. A hitman. And that his computer had been hacked by the Secret Service, according to an incident report obtained by the Hartford Courant. So now, wait a minute. That sounds crazy. Look, if anybody was considered doing anything crazy, it's a guy that claims that the person that he supports is sending the Secret Service after him to hack his computer and to send a Agent 47 after him. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy. So I don't know, dude. This is insane. And look, it looks as though Yovanovitch, I mean, she could have been hurt through this. And so I do think that there could have been, at least possibly, an attempt on her life had Trump not fired her. So I don't know, dude. This is This is bad. Now, these are only some of the documents released by Parnas. And again, we don't know a lot of the details yet. But I'm going to hazard a guess that there's a lot more crazy involved in the rest of them. And so we will have to see from here. All I can say, though, is yikes. All right. All right. So let's go to something that's crazy. All right. Recently, news broke of a very strange story where a Kansas man had asked a judge to let him engage in a sword fight with his ex-wife. Trial by combat. Now, this is David Ostrom, who lives in Kansas, and he was in a court filing, or he was in court, and filed on January 3rd that his former wife, Bridget Ostrom, and her attorney, Matthew Hudson, had, quote, destroyed him legally, and that he wants the chance to, quote, rend their souls from their bodies. Rend them souls. So, all right. So Ostrom claimed that the judge had the power to let the parties resolve their disputes on the field of battle legally. Oof. Talk about extreme measures, man. Also, going old school, right? In fact, Ostrom added in his filing that trial by combat has, quote, never been explicitly banned or restricted as a right in these United States. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure it's not on the books, but murder is. So now what he asked is that he asked for the judge to grant him 12 weeks time so he could secure some Japanese samurai swords. So, okay. Look, 12 weeks, I guess seems about right. Because you got to consider shipping from Japan and, craftsmanship and all that. I mean, but still. Oh, and some rudimentary training. Because, of course, you got to know what you're doing, right? If you're going to get into a sword fight, you got to know when to parry and when to strike. But wow. Okay. So now Ostrom said, quote, I think I've met Mr. Hudson's absurdity with my own absurdity, adding that his former wife could choose Hudson to act as her champion. Well, I mean, of course. I mean, I learned that from Game of Thrones, that if you have a trial by combat and you're not a good combatant, you could always appoint someone else to fight in your stead. And if they win, well, then congratulations. I don't know what happens. Now, Hudson argued. Now, this is a lawyer. He's like, no, I'm not in favor of this. He said that because a duel can end in death, such ramifications likely outweigh those of property tax and custody issues, which is what the whole issue is about. Property tax and custody issues. Who pays the property tax? Who gets custody of the kids? That's insanity. Hudson also asked the judge to reject the request for trial by combat. And you want to know what happened? Well, the judge, he punted. No decision. Judge Craig Dreismeyer said in his own filing on Monday that he will not be issuing decisions anytime soon, citing irregularities with both sides' motions and responses. Quote, until the proper procedural steps to initiate a court proceeding are followed, this court will take no further action considering any motion, objection, or petition filed by either party at this time. What? So that doesn't rule out trial by combat, right? I mean, it doesn't say you can. Also doesn't say you can't. I'm just saying. So that is probably the strangest response to a marital issue, or I guess dealing with an ex-wife, that's the craziest I've ever seen. Like, you got to be either really sure of yourself or very, very desperate or possibly insane to try to ask for a trial by combat in 2020, especially with samurai swords. Or you must really, really despise your ex-wife while also having to love anime and fedoras at the same time. Sorry, guys. For any of you who like anime and fedoras, my apologies. Couldn't resist. Ridiculous. All right. So let's get into some more depressing now that we've had a little bit of fluff. I believe human beings and fish can coexist peacefully. Yes. Who does this guy think he is? Travis Touchdown? Yes. Video game references for the win. All right. As well as a Bushism in there. All right. Play Dark Souls to learn parrying. No. You don't parry in Dark Souls. You just roll around. Roll around. All right. Anyway. A new study released on Monday showed that 2019 was yet another year of record-setting ocean warming, with water temperatures reaching the highest temperature ever recorded. So this is, of course, following a trend, the last 5 years, of course, being the hottest years on record. And every year seems to be getting hotter than the next. Now, the study was undertaken by an international team of about 14 scientists who just looked at temperature data going back to the 1950s. So they looked at recorded temperatures from the ocean's surface down to about 2,000 meters or about 1.2 miles. So not only did they find that we have the highest ocean temperatures ever recorded, they also found that the oceans are warming at an increasing speed. Now, Kevin Trenberth, senior scientist in the climate analysis section of the National Center for Atmospheric Research, said, quote, of warming, the upward trend is relentless. And so we can say with confidence that most of the warming is man-made climate change. Well, and how do they know? Well, it's because of the rate of warming. Now, the study showed that while the oceans warmed steadily between the years of 1955 and 1986, warming accelerated rapidly just within the last few decades. These numbers are astounding, by the way. Between 1987 and 2019, ocean warming was 450% greater than during the earlier time period. So you've had a 450% increase in the rate of warming. That is disastrous. And by the way, matches the increased usage of fossil fuels around the world. China using more fossil fuels, India, Russia, and of course, the United States as well. Now, Lijiang Cheng, the paper's lead author and associate professor at the International Center for Climate and Environmental Scientists at the Chinese Academy of Scientists, said that 100% of this rise is, quote, man-made. There are no reasonable alternatives aside from the human emissions of heat-trapping gases to explain this heating. Adding that to reach this temperature, and again, these numbers are going to blow your mind, the ocean would have had to take in 228 sextillion joules of heat. So now let me put that in perspective here. Chang explains that the Hiroshima atom bomb exploded with an energy of about 63 billion joules. Now, the amount of heat that we have put into the oceans in the last 25 years is equal to 3.6 billion Hiroshima atom bomb explosions. That's equivalent to dropping roughly 4 Hiroshima bombs into the ocean every second for the last quarter of a century. Jeez. And it gets worse, as I keep mentioning. The rate of warming is increasing. In fact, John Abraham, one of the authors of the study and a professor of mechanical engineering at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, adds, we are now at 5 to 6 Hiroshima bombs of heat every second. Yikes. So, look, the study explains that since 1970, that more than 90% of the planet's excess heat went right into the oceans, which explains the rate of warming, of course, while less than 4% was absorbed by the atmosphere and the land, which is why, of course, on land, we haven't actually seen the worst of it. That said, the increase in power of the storms, which, of course, look, scientists can't really say that climate change, creates more storms, but it does have an impact of those storms. They say, and this is Abraham says, if you want to understand global warming, you have to measure ocean warming. And again, higher temperatures due to climate change can make storms wetter and more dangerous. I was going to go to a quote, a Trump quote here. Ocean water. It's the wettest from the standpoint of water. Oh my God. This is who we have leading the United States, by the way. The guy who throws, paper towels at other people. This is, here you go. It's ocean water, big water, ocean water. Oh dear God. All right, more horrible news. Now, rising temperatures also mean ocean waters have less oxygen and are becoming more acidic. That's where we're seeing more dead zones, and also why you're seeing coral bleaching. And so corals all around the world are also dying. Coral reefs, and those are big places for obviously wildlife in the oceans. And so warming is also changing currents and altering weather systems at a speed, this is important, at a speed that wildlife cannot keep up with. Well, now, if wildlife can't adapt, then that wildlife will die out. That's a big problem. And so, look, I know that there are people out there that are like, well, the climate has always changed. And I'm using the Trump voice because basically it's the same thing, right? Climate's always changing. Look, that is true. Climate does always change, right? The issue with man-made climate change is that it's the rate of which it's changing. We are changing it more rapidly than we can adapt to it. And when that happens, and I just said it, for animal species and plants, if it changes too rapidly, more rapidly than we can adapt to it, then we also die. And so our emissions that we release into the atmosphere every single day, tons and tons of it, are making the atmosphere, the climate, change faster than any of us on the planet can actually adapt to it. And that is the major problem, right? And we need, and that's why we need to do something about it. That's why we need to slow the rate of warming by reducing our emissions. We can't undo the damage that's already been done. But what we can do is slow the rate of warming so that we have more time to adapt to what is to come. Warmer temperatures, stronger storms, and other issues associated with this, okay? And so let me get back to another quote here by Chang. He said, we will see a continuous increase in ocean heat content in the century, even if we can keep the global mean surface temperature rise well below 2 degrees Celsius. So now that 2 degrees Celsius is basically the goal, or was the goal of the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, Donald Trump, genius in chief, pulled us out of that deal. And by the way, not a lot of countries are following it anyway, because it was a non-binding resolution. And so, look, he said, if we can reduce emissions, we can reduce the warming level and then reduce the associated risks and losses. We cannot eliminate any of those things, but what we can do is make it a little bit easier for us to be able to adapt to what is to come. And that is rising temperatures, rising sea levels, increased immigration or migration from places that are more heavily affected, reduced food, growing areas. Reduced biodiversity. All these things are going to affect us. And really, it's our choice to figure out how much it's going to affect us through our actions. Now, Finally, Chang says this, quote, if the leaders of the world change course, a revolution could take place over about 15 years. And that's supposed to be the hopeful part of this. This would require, of course, the leaders of China, the US in particular, along with Europe and India and everywhere else, to take a strong leadership role and set the stage for the rest of the world to follow. And that, of course, is being very optimistic here that they would actually be interested in doing that kind of change. And this is where I get super depressed because I don't see this happening. I really don't. We have a danger right in front of us. And the president believes windmills cause cancer. I mean, he's railing about windmills. He's railing about water standards and toilets that you have to flush 10 to 15 times. We're doomed. We're doomed if Donald Trump has another, and not just Donald Trump. We're doomed if Joe Biden gets in because Joe Biden is, yes, he's going to follow the Paris Climate Agreement, which is going to reduce emissions by 2030, right? We need to do something. We need to do something now. Unless you're coming with a Green New Deal to completely transform our energy system as soon as possible, then we are screwed. We are screwed. And so the oceans will continue to get warmer. They will get to a point of where they can no longer absorb any excess heat. And then what's going to happen is it's going to make Mad Max look like a paradise. And I would certainly not like for that to happen. Okay. All right. That's it. That's all I got for you guys today. Please like and share the stream. Consider becoming a patron to support us. Independent progressive media. Look, patreon.com/TYTNation or become a channel member. And anything you can do really to support the channel, like, share, post videos, comment, like, all that stuff. It is helpful to us. All right, guys. So have a good day. Love you guys. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation. See you guys later.
You're kicking me out the door. You're kicking me out the door.